Administration ready to re-engage with North Korea. How would Japan feel about that? And what about South Korean elections a little over a month from now? All this and more next on The Impossible State.
North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become the United States' top national security priority. Each week on this show, we'll talk with the people who know the most about North Korea.
Welcome to another episode of the Impossible State podcast at CSIS. I'm your host, Victor Cha, President of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy at CSIS and Korea Chair, Professor at Georgetown. Today's topic is North Korea, finally. Most of our podcasts have been about everything else except North Korea. North Korea and the whole question of re-engagement with the Trump administration. And we have 2 wonderful people to discuss this topic with us today. Let me start with my guest to the immediate left, Sydney Seiler, who, as many of you know, has, after a very illustrious career in the U.S. government, has joined us at CSIS as a non-resident senior advisor. He was a national intelligence officer for North Korea at the NIC. And really is one of our country's top experts on North Korea. A distinguished career. Sid is one of these few people that have crossed the divide between intelligence work and policy work. Again, for a long time in the intelligence community, but then served in the Obama administration on the National Security Council as director for Korea, and then also as special envoy for 6 party talks. What are those things? 6 party talks. They're from a long time ago. But really great, Sid, to have you with us today.
Thank you, Victor.
Also joining us is Yuki Tatsumi, no stranger to any of you here in the Washington, D.C. think tank and policy world. Yuki is Senior Fellow and Co-Director of the East Asia Program and Director of the Japan Program at the Stimson Center. She is a CSIS alum. A long time ago, she worked as a research associate here at CSIS and also has worked as a special assistant for political affairs at the Embassy of Japan here in Washington, D.C. She's written many works, most recently Balancing Between Nuclear Deterrence and Disarmament, Views from the Next Generation, as well as Lost in Translation, U.S. Defense Innovation and Northeast Asia. So has written across a variety of topics, in particular related to East Asia defense and also, of course, Japan. So folks, we want to talk today. We thought it was about time, given some of the speculation in the press that there might be rumors of efforts by the Trump administration to re-engage with North Korea to try to take on this topic. Let me set the backdrop. You know, President Trump just passed the 100-day mark, gave a speech about it, talked about a lot of accomplishments, but I think it's pretty fair to say that we haven't seen much on North Korea, at least in terms of the policy. But it's not like the North Koreans haven't been active. They've been very active over the first 100 days of the Trump administration. They have, not in a big sort of flashy way, but quietly and consistently, they have conducted 5 missile tests in the first 100 days. They've stolen about $1.5 billion in cryptocurrency. They've sent an additional 3,000 troops to Russia. And then most recently, they unveiled the largest and most modern missile destroyer, a 5,000-ton warship, the biggest ones that the North Koreans have ever developed. They've been able to test their weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine. They've got replenished ammunition stockpiles and billions of dollars of arms sales from Russia. Learned military lessons from the war in Ukraine. Clearly a lot that's been going on. So the North Koreans, you know, in their very persistent way, have not been sort of sitting by and waiting for the United States to reach out. They've been quite busy. And so I guess the first question to both of you is, should these press reports ring true? We don't know if they are. Is this the right time for them for the administration to start re-engaging with North Korea, given all the other things that are going on? Is this a good time? Is this the right time? So let me ask you. terms of it.
Looking back at the past presidents and when they have rolled out Korea policies per se, and when they began to seek to engage North Korea, there really is no right or wrong time from a U.S. perspective. I think president after president has had the flexibility. They inherit to some degree policies and principles, directions, and that allows them to, open dialogue channels, probe, bottom line positions. And so it's not like everything is zeroed out when you have a change of leadership in Washington. The other important thing here is Pyongyang, Pyongyang's agencies. Is North Korea prepared to sit down and talk? So I will say on the one hand, we have no indications to believe North Korea is seriously considering putting anything substantive on the table, let alone sit at the table with us. That said, there are expectations of the United States and of the Trump administration. There are domestic expectations that the president has talked about his relationship with Kim Jong-un. I think people want to see what that translates into. If it's true, there's global implications. Certainly, the ROK, Japan, and other countries are interested in what we plan to do with North Korea. And then finally, Trump's own expectations. I think he believes at the right time in the right place, he can apply his negotiating skills in a way that can help get at least part of the North Korea issue back on some type of track where we have some interaction with them. We try to develop some influence. We try to address their concerns, and we move the diplomatic ball forward. So I would say now is as good time as any.
So just to follow up, Sid, I mean, you mentioned that you raised the question of whether North Korea has any interest at this particular time. We know, like for Donald Trump, the right time for engagement is always when he has leverage, when he feels he has leverage. And so, I mean, how do you think, does he have leverage at this point? Like you mentioned North Korean interests, they're doing quite well with Russia right now. So does Donald Trump have leverage at this point to reengage?
Russia is the variable here, isn't it? Both in terms of what North Korea is concretely getting from Russia in terms of access to technologies, other critical needs like food and oil, but also in terms of whatever pressure we may have been hoping to have built on North Korea to impose a price for the refusal to denuclearize, to try to use pressure. I know it hasn't changed behavior altogether, but at least to try to use pressure and isolation as means by which to incentivize North Korea coming back to the table by opening up the strategic partnership and cooperating like we've seen over the past several months. Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un have laid a pathway for a protracted period of not needing to talk to the United States. And so that really will impact the president's leverage. What could Donald Trump give Kim Jong-un that he's not getting from Vladimir Putin? I can't think of much.
Yeah. Yuki, let me ask you, so one of the things that Japan has done a lot in terms of North Korea policy on the leverage side has been participating in the multilateral sanctions regime. Right. So if you could tell us like what you think the state of that sanctions regime is at this point, again, given this question about leverage, right? Trump is always about leverage. And also how the Ishiba government looks at this particular issue. I don't know if they've said anything about this issue. I know that we've seen since Abe a slight change in the position to really allow for an open door, if you will. Right. Any thoughts on the Japan side?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. So I think picking up on your second question first on the what Ishiba might or might not have said in the past. He really hasn't said much since his time in the office. He's very focused in his first, 6 months or whatever in the office by getting his relationship with Trump administration right. And they're in the thick of tariff negotiations right now. So I don't think this particular leadership has much of a bandwidth to pay attention to anything else. That said, though, Ishiba did say in his policy speech, I believe, in the Diet at the beginning of his administration, he did make a reference to the fact that all these abductees' families are getting very, very elderly, and they have already begun, many of them have begun to getting either very sick or, passed away. So he did express a desire to seek some kind of a resolution to this for the sake of those aging families. But beyond that, I really haven't heard much specific, let alone, him making any specific comments about sanctions that Japan has been participated in. But, picking up your point, I think, because, it always has been China always has been the first country to give the way out to North Korea away from out of the sanction tight spot. But after, its relationship with Beijing starts going a little bit of a south, but then now North Korea has Russia, which is a great backup. It's like better backup than it has ever hoped for. So it really doesn't I think sanction regime, although it's still in place, doesn't have nearly as much bite as it might have been in the past. And that also de-incentivized North Korea, frankly, to come to the table in my mind.
What about, can you say more about, so the abductions issue has been such an important issue. It's been sort of the way Japan's policy towards North Korea has been steered, right, for the past. Is that really still the case very much? What's the domestic political context of this issue for Japan? If Trump were to re-engage with Kim Jong-un, where would Japan be on that? Would they be ready to move forward as well, or do you think they would pull back? Or
I think that abductee issue is a very interesting one. It now has a place in a different context. Now, Japan's issues with the northern territories vis-a-vis Russia used to be in this category too. That it is a very historical issue, and then obviously it's one of the World War II legacy issues with Russia on this territory issues. But then with North Korea, it's in a very different context, but still from the legacy of the Cold War era. And, but they both have a similar place in a Japanese foreign policy in a way that no Japanese leader can say anything about those issues not important for Japan. It's just politically not palatable to any Japanese leader. And then I think in a sense that really has put Japan in a box for the last, few decades since this, our trial of diplomatic effort to denuclearize North Korea has ever begun. So I think if let's say, for hypothetically speaking, if, President Trump announced on his Truth Social that I am meeting Kim Jong-un, right? First thing Japanese would try to make sure is that his talking points will include his reference to abduction.
Sid, go ahead.
If you look back at the history of this issue, and you and I have been in the middle of, six-party talks and other multilateral fora, and of course, together with our bilateral discussions with Seoul and Tokyo on this, there has never been a time when the abductee issue has proven to be an obstacle or a hindrance to our pursuit of denuclearization. It's somewhat like the human rights issue in that, and inter-Korean issues, that one can only imagine a truly developing close relationship between the U.S. and the DPRK that has some degree of resolution of the denuclearization issue, or confidence we're on a positive path. And a North Korea that's made that strategic decision is likely to be responsive to our calls for them to talk to Korea more sincerely and to address Japan's legitimate concerns about their the abductees. But, again, I think people have mischaracterized Japan as unilaterally pursuing this niche issue at the expense of denuclearization objectives. And that's just not been the history of the talks that I've been involved in.
I agree with that. I think Japan always has found a way by working with the United States to place the abduction issues always in the mix, but doing so in a way that it does not block any types of denuclearization effort, because they do realize that is a much more clear and present and urgent issue that they need to address for their national security concerns.
Yeah. So I entirely agree with you. I think that's where the policy is today. I would beg to differ on one specific point, which is there was a time when we were doing the six-party talks where the first Abe government, the first Abe administration, would not participate in the heavy fuel oil equivalent distributions in the initial rounds because the North Koreans were so obstinate about not talking anything about abductions as issues. So that did happen at one point, and so we had to do a workaround, at least for the first cycle of providing these incentives to North Korea, where we would go, the U.S., Korea, skip Japan, then do China, Russia, and then come back. But I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen is that the U.S. has talked to Japan about looking at the abductee issue as part of this broader basket of human rights issues between the U.S. and Japan and North Korea. As part of a broader human rights issue, that's a precondition for normalized relations, and that, I think, that has been an evolution in the policy as well. But of course, like this issue matters a great deal for Japanese public, Japanese people. I met Megumi's mother, spent a whole afternoon with her when Megumi's parents came to the White House and met with President Bush. So it's really, it really is quite important. Let me shift to a slightly different time, and I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this. So one of the things that we've noticed about the way President Trump has talked about the North Korea every time he's gotten a question has been, he's basically been positive, left the door open to re-engaging, but he's used language that's a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. And in particular, it's something along the lines of, oh yeah, my good friend Kim Jong-un, he's got nuclear weapons, or he's a nuclear power. The term nuclear power seems to come up. It came up in Rubio's confirmation testimony. President Trump has said it a number of times. And for those of us who watch this very carefully, that sounds like significant language. It could be just Trump speaking loosely, or is it really significant language that connotes possibly, potentially, de facto acceptance of North Korea as a country that possesses nuclear weapons. So Sid, I'd like to get your thoughts on that, whether you think that's significant and whether it matters. And then Yuki, also your thoughts on that, and in particular, if there was any coverage in Japan about how they looked at that sort of language and what it would mean to the Japanese foreign ministry if they continue to hear this sort of language.
Well, we know, first of all, it's not a technical term per se, like a nuclear weapons state under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it does look like it has been used often enough that it reflects some type of thinking among the leadership, among the president, Secretary Rubio, that somehow their diplomatic approach could either be justified by the urgency of needing to deal with a nuclear power, or that Kim Jong-un could be somehow enticed to come to the negotiating table if he feels he'll get some type of respect, the respect that he was seeking to get in Singapore, the respect that he was seeking to get at Hanoi, that he basically, scored an own goal, or he fumbled away the opportunities. And so to provide Kim Jong-un with the thought that, that we would treat him with respect, that we would not, treat him as a defeated state, which is what North Korea always like to call U.S. calls for denuclearization, and somehow it was asking them to strip naked or come to the table as a defeated state. So I think it may be more within that context. I would say that through the secretary and the spokesperson over its state, spokesperson at NSC, others have clarified that denuclearization of North Korea remains a goal of the United States. And I think that in its significance is greater than these more casual references. Maybe casual is the wrong word, but less nuanced than we otherwise might think references to North Korea as a nuclear power.
Yeah. Yuki, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree to that, because when President first used the word nuclear power, I can already like, without even talking to anybody, I can already imagine, right? My friends in the Japanese foreign ministry thinking, oh my gosh, here it comes. there are people in this administration who are more talking about nuclear, like arms control, as opposed to denuclearization, because that is, I think, the most important goal that Japan cannot forsake, is the denuclearization of North Korea for all the legitimately, understandably, strategically important reasons for the stability of East Asia as a whole. But I think with this particular president, I would still categorize a current way that he's using this term as more of a loose reference to the fact that acknowledging that North Korea does have a nuclear program, but it doesn't mean that we are already in the land of where we kind of accepted in India and Pakistan as a de facto nuclear power way back when, about 30 years ago. I don't think we were there. And then I think that is where Japan tries to avoid of getting there.
Let me take the conversation on the same topic to the other side of the peninsula, which is the conversations, discussions in South Korea, increasing discussions in South Korea about nuclearization. The fact that we've been so spectacularly unsuccessful in denuclearizing North Korea through diplomacy, the lack of attention to it right now, at least by the Trump administration, the failures of the Biden administration, the failed agreements, whether it was Leap Day, right, that you were involved. Well, you were also in six-party talks. Leap Day, six-party talks, agreed framework, just everything has failed. And plus a lot of uncertainty with regard to President Trump and where he's going to go in terms of commitments, whether it's to NATO or to others. There's a lot more talk in Korea about this idea of South Korean nuclearization. So, Sid, I want to ask you how you read that, and then Yuki, I wanted to ask you, what's the Japanese reaction to this growing chorus of opinion on the topic?
Well, as you know, it's somewhat amazing that we haven't had this conversation more deeply, more intensely earlier. Although clearly, since the early days of this issue, in the early 1990s. The implications of a nuclear North Korea and a non-nuclear South Korea has been on the minds of security experts in the Republic of Korea and elsewhere for many years. And what was a major motivator not to challenge that was, one, to bring credibility to denuclearization talks, in particular based upon the 1992 North-South Korea denuclearization declaration, to remain committed to that even as North Korea was not, to go into six-party talks and negotiate a path towards denuclearization, even agreeing to the language of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as suggesting somehow there was anything for South Korea to denuclearize or not. So we're at a point in the evolution of this issue where the conversation, in my opinion, needs to be had. Even if the result is clearly this is not going to meet South Korea's deterrence needs. Right now, thanks to good work in the last administration, we addressed some of these extended deterrence concerns. We had the Washington Declaration, stood up the NCG, started to discuss how to meet the North Korea threat. In the months and years in the immediate future, I think there are going to be examinations of arms control formulae or some other approach to North Korea that maybe addresses some issues of concern to the United States, but brings into question the credibility of the U.S. Extended deterrence to South Korea. So we need to continue to have these discussions, whether it's about a nuclear South Korea, whether it's about the reintroduction of non-strategic nuclear weapons to the peninsula, whether it's about dual-use aircraft and other options. I think it's a natural topic for discussion.
Mm-hmm. And we see it coming up quite a bit now in the opinion polling and other sorts of things. What is the Japan reaction? I find that when I go to Japan, what is interesting to me is when I meet with Japanese security experts, it used to be that the first thing they would ask would be about North Korea, denuclearization diplomacy. Is the U.S. going to engage? Now the first question is not about North Korea; it's about South Korea. And do you think South Korea is going to go nuclear?
Yeah, I think that recent trend of a discussion or direction that South Korea's domestic discussion on this issue is going definitely is been noticed by Japan, being very closely watched. There are two clear there are differences amongst how they receive it between South Korean discussion about reintroducing, American tactical nukes into South Korea versus South Korea's own indigenous nuclear program. Mm-hmm. The latter, I would not say it still wouldn't cross the threshold for Japan to start actually taking steps for indigenous, but that South Korea's, let's say, announcement of we're going to pursue our own indigenous nuclear program, that will definitely reactivate very intensely some of the internal conversation that Japan has had in the past about re-examining what their nuclear option might be. And that definitely then, in that case, that'll involve whether their traditional approach, which they continue to maintain up to today, of maintaining what's known as nuclear non-3Ps, do not possess, do not produce, and do not introduce, would those exactly three same principles still hold to meet Japanese need for its deterrent needs. And there are always a question about maybe Japanese government should formally say only 2 Ps apply. And we're dropping third P, which is not to introduce. And make it even more, kind of open the aperture toward a little bit more toward up to this point, introduction of U.S. nuclear weapons or nuclear subs are up for, technically speaking, consultation, a prior consultation between the two allies. But if they get rid of this third P, that drops. So that kind of opens the door of U.S. strategic forces comes in and out of Japan without even making any note, making any announcement or any consultation. So would that be come into consideration? If South Korea's indigenous nuclear program will probably put that in very much of an active play.
Mm-hmm. The I guess one of the things that I don't know but I noticed sort of at the end of the Biden administration in their efforts to try to engage with North Korea, they said basically we're ready to talk any place, anytime, and if they got the question about are you willing to talk arms control or threat reduction, which is a code word for saying, you're accepting them as a nuclear weapon state. The response was always something along the lines of, we're happy to have discussions on anything that sustains and bolsters stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula. So it was like a slight change in wording that sort of left the door open to, we're ready to talk about anything. But I think you're right. In a Trump administration, Trump may talk loosely, but then the people below him always try to hammer the policy back into its place, saying, no, it's still denuclearization that will still be the case. But it still raises concerns, right? I mean, it raises concerns and interest in Japan.
It still definitely raises huge concerns in Japan. It's are there still people thinking about arms control, threat reduction realm and containing nuclear program as opposed to denuclearize?
Yeah.
What I find amazing, the problems that one would have with arms control are usually not the ones that come to mind when there's this knee-jerk reaction against it. The concern is that somehow it would lock in North Korea's nuclear weapons status. I can imagine an arms control that retains CVID as an end goal. So you have your cake and eat it too. We know it's all about denuclearization, but we're getting there along a timeline that's reasonable and doesn't seek to get everything at once. Well, frankly, that's how we negotiated the six-party talks at September 19th joint statement and the follow-on implementation actions, the approach that subsequently followed with the Obama administration, and even Trump term 1, it was we're not going to get it all, but we need to be on a path with CVID as the end goal. My concern about the arms control approach is that North Korea has made it pretty clear what that will look like to them. And that will be looking at parity with the United States as a nuclear adversary, starting with the United States rolling back its military exercises, rolling back its extended deterrence, strategic asset demonstrations, putting U.S. forces on the table, and putting the very U.S. security commitment to the ROK on the table, because all of these consist of what North Korea describes as the nuclear threat that they face. And only when these things are addressed, the exercises extended deterrence, U.S. forces Korea, U.S. ROK security treaty, then and only then can North Korea consider denuclearizing. And what that means is we would have to really reduce the nuclear deterrent that we provide South Korea in order for the hope that maybe North Korea might accept certain limitations on certain weapons. And it's just not appealing when you think about what the negotiating objectives of North Korea would be under arms control talks.
Right. So, I mean, if we think about this on the ground, the easy way to square the circle is to, if they were to meet again, just to get them to reaffirm the Singapore statement, which had denuclearization in it, and then start to engage and, effectively threaten to like freeze the facilities, get inspectors back in, get a nuclear test ban, all these things. But your point is that those intermediate steps, we're very familiar with them. We've done them before. But this quickly becomes not a very feasible prospect when we think about what the North Koreans will demand, right?
Because you were personally involved. We were both personally involved in that period of the six-party talks in that 2006, 2007, 2008 time period. And look at how much the North Korean nuclear threat has changed. There's no way they're going back to the table and putting anything of significance on, that would attract us without high demands of us that I think we would just find unacceptable.
Find unacceptable. Yeah. Can I ask you, Yuki, the other piece of this, obviously, we talked about leverage, whether Trump has any leverage. North Korea is getting a lot. You said they're basically getting everything from Russia that they could have wanted from China, right? And more. From a Japanese perspective, how does Japan look at that growing tie between DPRK and Russia? I mean, clearly, it's not good for Japan, but how are they thinking about that? And is their entree to that issue really through DPRK or is it through Russia?
So short answer is yes, very concerning, but it has kind of many dimensions to it. So clearly, Russia giving North Korea a way out of sanction is concern in this context, right? But then what this deepening ties between North Korea and Russia also means for Japan's own national defense is that it could mean more active Russia on the north side of the Japanese archipelago when Japan starts to refocus its defense force posture more towards southwestern island, away from that north, right? So that means potentially Japan basically, have a long archipelago and they finally start swinging down to southwestern island to meet Chinese maritime challenges. But then what this could mean is that they might have to swing some of that back up to north. And, they have a demographic issue to, fill in all the billets. They have resource issue because of its aging population and economy. That presents a lot of national security challenges for Japan on many different fronts.
Interesting. I mean, I know that Japan is very concerned about this so-called opportunistic aggression scenario with something happening in Taiwan and then something happening in North Korea or vice versa.
Right.
But you're raising this other issue, which is even putting aside the two contingency scenario, that as they focus more on the Southwest islands for a Taiwan contingency, there's a lot of things that Russia can do in the North. Yeah. And does the military relationship now between DPRK and Russia, does that help Russia in the North? I mean, a lot of its troops and munitions, but I guess it's missiles too, right? So.
Yeah, I think to them it does. It does kind of mutually helping is probably the best word that I could use. But throw China in the mix too. Because we were already, Japan was already worried about China and Russia doing more coordinated actions precisely on that side of the archipelago these days, right? And then it didn't go unnoticed when Japan was, pulling all the forces in to respond to that, triple disaster 10 years ago. China and Russia keeps doing this incursion into the into their airspace. Then they have not forgotten that. So, basically multiply that intensity times 10
Yeah.
in this current environment.
Yeah.
Very worrisome for them.
Yeah. Last question I want to ask you, Sid, is so there's an election in South Korea, June 3rd. There will be a new president of South Korea. How would that election affect a Trump engagement scenario, or how would a new Korean government respond to a Trump re-engagement scenario with North Korea?
That's a great question. And I know that, one of the principles that we had in place during the Obama years was that, we would place a high priority on the alliance above all else, so that we didn't chase Pyongyang down roads that appeared to have some type of glimmer of hope in a way that passed Seoul, that Korea passing, that they're concerned about, and would cause rough feelings in the relationship and angst and what have you. So there was a commitment that I think carried over into the Trump administration, Trump term 1 and Moon Jae-in, coordinated quite closely on their approaches. And I think they were able to calibrate their respective approaches to North Korea in a way that was complementary. And I think that would be true regardless of who is new. Obviously, the difference between the conservatives and the progressives in terms of how they may seek to approach North Korea will be significant. I don't know that North Korea would act much differently toward a progressive government than it would towards a conservative. Just they have shown no interest in talking to the United States. They've demonstrated recently, they said so directly that they were fooled by Moon and deceived by Yoon, and frankly they've given up hope for talking with South Korea. So I'm positive that we can navigate these waters regardless of the outcome of the election. I think for the progressives, they must learn that this is not simply a turning back the clock to 2018 and 2019. The difficulties in the relationship with North Korea are not the result of the hardline Yoon administration policy toward the North. They're the result of Pyongyang's choices, behaviors, and actions. And the same, by the way, I think holds true for China and Russia as well. So I think, I hope that regardless of the outcome of the election, we will have a partner who is willing to engage with the Trump administration in addressing these key security concerns in Asia.
Right. And then just to finish, Yuki, could I ask you
Yeah.
that, so, the last major engagement between Japan and the PRK was the so-called Pyongyang Declaration that was Koizumi and Kim Jong-il. Is that still if there were re-engagement, is that still the go-to document for a Japanese government if they were to re-engage with North Korea?
I would say yes, that'll be the base of which they would engage and they would re-engage. And that's where all the essence that they would need to seek from North Korea, which is denuclearization, abduction issue, and this comprehension package idea. That's all the essence of that is there. So I think I would say they would start by referring back to Pyongyang Declaration.
Great. Okay. Well, great discussion. We shall see. We'll probably have to come back again and do this in a few more weeks to see as the situation develops. So thank you again to our guests. Thank you, viewers, for watching our podcast, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Impossible State.